Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being late. I was in a markup, but it doesn't sound like I missed much because it's the same old points being hammered over and over again for political reasons and not trying to really look for a solution. Also, this committee just continues to look at this one topic. If you're talking about dereliction of duty, perhaps we should be looking at some of the other aspects of Homeland Security, like cyber security. That's such a major issue, or real immigration reform, or domestic terrorism. Those are all part of our charge, and not looking at those, I think, is a dereliction of duty. In my district, we have a lot of mixed status families. We have somebody who is a dreamer, somebody who's TPS, somebody who's a citizen, somebody who has no papers, and somebody who doesn't even know what they are. So that's 5 problems all in one. I'd like to ask you, Ms. Acer, if you would comment a little bit about the TPS aspect of that, because it was just announced that the president was going to extend TPS for El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Nepal. Can you talk about how that helps with humane immigration or accommodation of people here? We've got 6,000 TPS holders, mostly from El Salvador and southern Nevada. So I'd just like to hear more about where that is.
Yeah, TPS is critical. It is, a life-saving protection for people from places that are too dangerous, or for other reasons people cannot be returned to. So it's a lifesaver. It could be improved, and there needs to be access for people to eventually, after a certain number of years, to really be able to stabilize their families, to be able to bring their kids to safety, and ultimately to get onto a path to citizenship.
Well, I know that the former president ended TPS, excuse me, for some of these countries. There were some people who had been here 20 years, had established a family, had a job, paying taxes, and then suddenly that's yanked away and they're sent back. So maybe you could help us with some ways that we could actually put forward to improve the system, as you mentioned.
I'd happy to suggest changes, and I think one of the most important ones is that people can actually get onto a path to citizenship at some point, and also to bring their families together. We also need to make sure to be using redesignation authority, because sometimes situation in a country triggers a need for TPS, and then time can change again. Time goes on, but actually the situation is even worse, so that TPS needs to be redesignated to make sure to protect people.
Well, thank you. Also, I think you were on the ground when Title 42 was lifted. There were some that were just so anxious to see these people rush across the border, chaos, sending down troops. I don't know if they thought there was going to be some confrontation, but of course it didn't happen, and the numbers have actually gone down. Would you talk about that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so we were there, including on the first day after Title 42. We were in Matamoros. We also were in Reynosa. Everywhere we went, we met asylum seekers. We spoke to, I think, hundreds of asylum seekers. I was part of a delegation with the Haitian Bridge Alliance and other NGOs, as well as just on our own with our own researcher. And people were struggling to follow the process for seeking asylum at ports of entry. We were asked so many questions about the CBP-1 app. People were trying to use it, couldn't get an appointment. There are tons of glitches, as you've all heard. Some people with dark skin were having trouble actually being able to register for the system. Many people don't have phones. Asylum seekers, we spoke to many families who had been robbed of their phones or didn't have one to begin with. In some cases, there was a need for internet access. People were walking around struggling, trying to get sufficient internet access to be able to actually use the app. And the other problem is that the number of appointments are really small. When you look across the border, and you have asylum seekers who've been waiting and waiting for weeks and months, and it's in the U.S. interest for people to actually go to ports of entry and seek asylum there if possible. I'd stress also, though, that it's so important for there to be access to asylum for people who can't use and access CBP-1. Not everyone can. There are people who don't speak languages that are used by the system, and as I mentioned, there are people without phones. We've got to make sure that our ports of entry are operational and that there's ways for people who are seeking asylum who don't have to have CBP-1 appointments to be able to do so, and who can't get them. And asylum seekers from Mexico, there are asylum seekers from Mexico who have been waiting and waiting. It's the next door country, but can't get in at one of the ports of entry.
Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.